Pretending to rehearse conversations in our head before they happen. Pretending to rehearse conversations in our head before they happen is something almost every human does, even if they don't admit it. You could be preparing to talk to your boss, apologizing to a friend, asking someone for a favor, or simply imagining a future scenario that might happen. In the mind, you go over what you want to say, you picture how the other person might respond, and you adjust your reply each time, almost like you are rehearsing for a play. It may feel odd, but it is actually one of the brain's most natural behaviors, and it happens for several psychological and emotional reasons that are much deeper than they seem at first glance. The first reason we rehearse conversations is because the human brain does not like uncertainty. Uncertainty introduces emotional risk, and the brain always tries to reduce risk by predicting what might happen. When you rehearse the conversation mentally, you are trying to create a sense of control over something that is not completely predictable. In fact, your brain is trying to protect you from embarrassment, conflict, misunderstanding, or rejection. The more socially important the moment feels, the more likely you are to rehearse it. You could even be practicing tone, facial expression, or wording without realizing it. This internal rehearsal is not about being overly dramatic. It is actually a survival strategy. For thousands of years, humans depended on social connections for safety, cooperation, and community. Being rejected or misunderstood could have serious consequences. So our ancestors developed a natural instinct to think very carefully before communicating, because successful communication increased survival. Today, we don't face those same dangers, but our brain still behaves like our ancient ancestors. It still tries to make sure we speak in ways that keep us socially accepted and emotionally safe. Another reason people rehearse conversations is because they want to express themselves clearly. Many times, emotions grow heavy and tangled in our minds. When you mentally run through a conversation, you are giving yourself a chance to organize your thoughts, sort out your feelings, and find words that match what you genuinely want to say. This is especially true when something matters deeply to you. You do not want to say the wrong thing, you do not want to hurt someone, and you do not want to come across the wrong way. So the brain practices, sometimes again and again, searching for the right wording, tone, and emotional timing. People also rehearse conversations because they fear being caught off guard. When we imagine how someone else might respond, we are trying to prepare ourselves emotionally. If you imagine someone reacting harshly or disagreeing, you rehearse how you will stay calm. If you imagine someone being supportive or understanding, you rehearse how to respond to that too. Your brain is trying to be ready for every possible outcome, because surprises are stressful and emotionally uncomfortable. Interestingly, rehearsing conversations does not only happen before events, it often happens after them. You may go home thinking, "I should have said this," or "Why didn't I reply differently?" This is the same mental mechanism trying to learn from past communication, so that next time you respond better. The brain runs multiple imagined versions, almost like editing a scene in a movie. Although this habit can make people feel nervous sometimes, it actually shows emotional intelligence. It means you care about communication. It means you want to express yourself clearly and treat others respectfully. It means your brain is working to solve problems before they happen and create smoother human interactions. Of course, there are times when mental rehearsing becomes overwhelming, especially if the imagined scenarios turn negative. But in moderation, it is one of the most common and surprisingly helpful psychological behaviors. It reveals your values, your fears, your motivations, and your boundaries. It helps you discover what matters to you emotionally. It helps you avoid impulsive reactions. It helps you bring clarity into chaotic feelings and gives you a quiet, internal space to understand yourself. So even though rehearsing conversations internally may seem strange from the outside, It is actually a sign of how deeply humans care about connection, understanding, and emotional safety. It is one of the quiet ways the mind prepares for real-life communication. Not because we're weak or insecure, but because we are wired to seek clarity, belonging, and harmony in our relationships. Holding our breath while passing someone awkwardly. Holding our breath while passing someone awkwardly is one of those behaviors we rarely talk about, yet most people secretly do. You are walking down a hallway, crossing paths in a supermarket aisle, brushing shoulders on a narrow sidewalk, or sitting beside someone you do not know very well. And suddenly, without planning it, you stop breathing for a moment. You may not even notice it until after it happens. It feels as if your body presses pause, like you are bracing yourself for something uncomfortable, even though nothing truly dangerous is happening. Why would the brain do this? The moment seems so small, but psychologically it is surprisingly complex. The first reason is social tension. When two people come close enough to enter each other's personal space, even briefly, the brain goes into a mini alert state. Humans evolved to be sensitive to physical closeness because closeness once meant threat, conflict, or vulnerability. That instinct is still inside us. We no longer worry about wild animals or tribal enemies. But the body still reacts with tiny defensive signals, and holding our breath is one of the simplest unconscious reactions. Breathing is tied directly to emotions. When we feel safe, our breathing is relaxed, smooth, and automatic. When we feel awkward, unsure, or uncomfortable, breathing becomes shorter, tighter, or paused. That pause, the holding of breath, is like a freeze response in miniature. It is the body saying, "Let's stay still until this moment passes." It is not fear in the dramatic sense. It is a subtle instinct that comes from wanting to avoid awkwardness, judgment, or unwanted attention. Another reason people hold their breath in awkward passing moments is because they do not want to seem confrontational or too noticeable. When you breathe, especially when you exhale strongly, you take up space, you are present, you are social. When you hold your breath, you shrink yourself temporarily, almost as if saying, "Let's get through this moment quietly." Humans sometimes do this to avoid triggering discomfort in others as well. It is a quiet, mutual agreement. Both people pass, both stay neutral, and nobody's body language feels too obvious. There is also an emotional explanation tied to social self-consciousness. In close passing moments, our brain becomes hyper-aware of how we appear. Do they think I'm staring? Do I look awkward? What expression is on my face? The brain cannot control everything at once, so it simplifies. It pauses breathing to reduce the feeling of exposure, similar to how someone might freeze when embarrassed or unsure. Interestingly, this breath-holding behavior is also connected to mirror neuron activity in the brain. Humans subconsciously sync with each other's behavior. When someone seems tense or uncertain, we may match that tension without realizing it. Even silence can spread tension like a small ripple. Two strangers passing each other create a tiny moment of mirrored uncertainty. Let's also consider the survival mechanism. Long ago, humans used a freeze response to avoid drawing attention in dangerous situations. Today, that response appears in tiny, socially awkward moments instead. It is not logical danger, but emotional discomfort triggers the same pattern. The brain has not evolved fast enough to separate emotional awkwardness from physical threat, so it gives the same response, just on a smaller scale. There is also something interesting about what happens after the moment passes. Many times, people take a sudden breath afterward, as if they were underwater. That inhale is not dramatic. It is subtle, but it signals relief. The moment is over. The awkwardness has vanished. The social pressure dissolved. This release is the body's way of saying, "Everything is fine again." This behavior is extremely common. People of all ages, cultures, and personalities do it. Extroverts do it, introverts do it, confident people do it, shy people do it. It is not a sign of weakness or social anxiety. It is simply a sign of how sensitive human communication truly is. Even the tiniest interaction contains layers of instinct, psychology, and evolution. The important thing to understand is that holding our breath when passing someone awkwardly is not strange or embarrassing. It is a reminder of how deeply humans are connected to nonverbal communication. It shows that our brains and bodies respond to social signals even when we are not consciously aware of them. It reflects our natural desire for social harmony, respect for personal space, and instinct to handle brief interactions smoothly. Rereading the same sentence multiple times while mentally drifting. Rereading the same sentence multiple times while mentally drifting is something almost everyone experiences at some point. Whether they are reading a book, studying for school, going through work documents, or even reading a simple message. You stare at the words, your eyes are literally tracking the sentence, yet your mind has wandered somewhere else entirely. Then you catch yourself and go back, reading the sentence again, sometimes 3, 4, or even 5 times before it finally sinks in. This behavior can feel strange or frustrating or even confusing, but it actually makes complete sense once you understand what the brain is doing in those moments. The main reason this happens is because the brain handles attention and comprehension separately. Reading uses mental focus, memory, internal narration, and interpretation of meaning all at the same time. But if even one of those systems becomes distracted, the entire process collapses. The eyes are doing their job, scanning the words, but the brain is not fully processing them. It is a bit like your body being present while your mind steps out for a moment, almost like mental autopilot. What usually causes this drift is competing thoughts. Your brain may suddenly switch from reading to thinking about something unrelated, perhaps something emotional, something stressful, something exciting, or something simply more interesting. You might start thinking about a future plan, a memory, a problem you are trying to solve, or even a random thought that appears out of nowhere. The brain prioritizes internal thinking over external reading because internal thinking feels more urgent or personal. This behavior also ties into the way the brain conserves energy. Reading, especially material that requires concentration, takes significant cognitive effort. When the brain gets tired or overwhelmed, it slips into short bursts of daydreaming or internal thought to rest. In that resting state, reading continues but without real processing. Rereading then becomes the brain's attempt to restart comprehension after a moment of drift. Another important factor is emotional load. If your mind is occupied by something unresolved, maybe stress, worry, excitement, fear, or planning, those emotional thoughts take priority. The brain is designed to solve emotional matters first because unresolved problems feel like threats. So even if you want to focus, the brain redirects attention to the emotional issue. That is why you might reread the same line over and over, especially if you are stressed or mentally overloaded. This behavior also reveals something interesting about consciousness. The brain has multiple layers operating at the same time: conscious attention, subconscious thoughts, background planning, sensory awareness, and emotional reactions. When one layer becomes too strong, it pulls focus away from reading. It is not a failure. It is the brain doing what it naturally does, shifting between mental channels. There is also a neurological explanation involving short-term memory. When comprehension fails, it means the information did not enter working memory, so the brain cannot store or link it to existing knowledge. Rereading is simply an attempt to give working memory another chance to capture the information. It is the brain trying to refocus, not malfunctioning. Another thing to understand is that drifting mentally while reading is often linked to mild dissociation, a normal mental process where awareness temporarily disconnects from the present moment. This can happen when someone is tired, emotionally distracted, not deeply engaged with the material, or simply lost in thought. It becomes even more common with repetitive or boring text because the brain seeks stimulation elsewhere. What is surprising is that everyone experiences this, no matter how intelligent, focused, or motivated they are. Students do it, professionals do it, parents do it, even people who love reading do it. It is not a flaw in attention. It is just the way the brain cycles between internal and external focus. In fact, mental drifting can even be useful. Sometimes during those tiny daydream moments, the brain organizes thoughts, solves problems, or processes emotions. You might not even realize it, but drifting can help creativity and emotional clarity. The only downside is that it interrupts reading, causing you to reread. So while reading the same sentence repeatedly might feel strange or annoying, it is simply a side effect of how the brain works. It shows that the mind is active, reflective, processing many layers at once and sometimes giving priority to internal thoughts over external words. It is not a sign of weakness or lack of intelligence. It is a sign that the brain is managing multiple cognitive tasks, balancing emotional needs, conserving energy, and shifting focus in natural ways. Taking a deep sigh when overwhelmed even without realizing it. Taking a deep sigh when overwhelmed even without realizing it is one of the most natural and universal things humans do. It happens in moments of stress, frustration, emotional overload, exhaustion, confusion, or even when we are struggling to make a decision. The sigh rises almost automatically without planning or conscious effort. You take in a deep breath, release it slowly, and for a brief moment it feels like your body resets itself. What seems like a strange or meaningless action actually has a powerful purpose, both physically and emotionally. A sigh is the body's built-in reset button. When a person becomes overwhelmed, their nervous system shifts into a state of tension. This tension might not look dramatic, but inside, the body is tightening muscles, shortening breathing, and preparing itself for stress. Rapid, shallow breathing is the natural result of emotional overload. When breathing becomes shallow, the brain receives less oxygen, meaning focus, clarity, and emotional regulation decrease. The deep sigh interrupts that pattern, restoring balance and reintroducing oxygen. It is almost as if the body remembers what we forget. We need to breathe fully to function properly. The sigh is also a communication between mind and body. Our thoughts speed up, our emotions pile up, our nervous system feels pressured, and the body says, we need to slow down. Humans are not always aware of this internal message because it happens below conscious awareness. The sigh rises not because we want it to, but because our body needs it. The rhythm of a sigh pulls us back into the present moment, reminding us to take space, even if only for a second. But the sigh does more than regulate oxygen. It releases physical tension. When people hold stress, they often tighten muscles in their shoulders, jaw, stomach, and back. The slow exhale of a sigh signals to the nervous system that it is safe to relax. It activates the parasympathetic system, the part of the body responsible for calming us down. It is the same system activated during rest, meditation, or deep sleep. The sigh is like a gentle internal whisper. It's okay. You can relax now. Emotionally overwhelmed people sigh for another reason. The brain is trying to reset mental focus. When stressed, the mind gets cluttered with thoughts. The deep sigh momentarily pauses the clutter and allows a micro reset. The slight pause gives clarity, helping you reconnect with your thoughts in a calmer way. It helps the brain restart attention. like pressing a software refresh button. There is also a psychological explanation connected to emotional expression. Humans do not always know how to verbalize what they feel. Sometimes we do not even know what the feeling is. The sigh becomes a form of silent emotional release. It is a way the body says, "I can't carry all of this internally. Let me let some pressure out." The sigh expresses tension without words. It expresses frustration without conflict. It expresses overwhelm without emotional breakdown. Sighing also has social roots. Humans use sighs around others to signal emotional states. A sigh can communicate frustration, fatigue, sadness, relief, or even resignation. Without realizing it, sighs tell others, "I'm stressed," or "I'm tired," or "I need a moment." Even when the sigh is silent or subtle, people around us can pick it up. Humans are wired to read emotional cues, and sighing is one of the simplest signals. It is also interesting to note that people sigh when they are not consciously overwhelmed. They sigh while working, while thinking, while solving problems. In these moments, the body is helping the brain clear space and maintain balance before things get emotionally overloaded. The sigh works like preventive maintenance for the nervous system. Everyone sighs: children, adults, the elderly, even animals. It is not a weakness or flaw. It is not a sign that someone is emotional or unstable. It is a deeply intelligent physiological function that helps humans survive stress, remain mentally organized, process feelings, and regulate breathing. Without sighing, the nervous system would become overwhelmed much faster. So taking a deep sigh when overwhelmed, even without noticing it, is not strange. It is a natural release valve built into human biology, psychology, and emotional regulation. It reminds us that the human body knows what we need even when we are not consciously aware of it. The sigh is not just a breath, it is the body protecting itself, recalibrating and giving us a moment of stability in a world that often feels chaotic. Seeing faces in random patterns, clouds, tiles, plug sockets, etc. Seeing faces in random patterns like clouds, tiles, plug sockets, food textures, or the front of a car is a strange yet universal human experience. You might be staring at a bathroom tile and suddenly notice something that looks like eyes and a mouth. Or you see a cloud shaped like a face floating in the sky. You know logically it isn't a real face, but your mind instantly labels it as one. This behavior has a scientific name: pareidolia. Even though it feels odd, it is actually a perfectly normal function of the human brain, and there are deep psychological and evolutionary reasons behind why we do it. The human brain is a pattern recognition machine. One of its biggest priorities is detecting meaning in the world, even when there is none. The reason our brain is so good at finding faces specifically is because faces are extremely important to us. Humans rely on facial recognition for communication, emotional understanding, and survival. The face tells us whether someone is safe, angry, friendly, dangerous, or someone we know. So the brain is wired to identify faces quickly, much faster than any other object. We recognize faces even faster than we recognize written words. Because of this priority, the brain becomes hypersensitive to face-like shapes. 2 dots in a line can be interpreted as eyes and a mouth. A shadow across a wall may appear like a nose. A slightly curved shape might resemble a smile. The brain says, "That could be a face, better assume it is." Rather than risk missing a real face, the brain would rather detect a face when it isn't one at all. From an evolutionary perspective, this made sense. Thousands of years ago, survival depended on recognizing friend from enemy instantly. Early detection was safer than delayed detection. Another reason humans see faces everywhere is related to something called top-down processing. That means the brain uses memory, expectations, and emotional knowledge to interpret what it sees. It doesn't simply look at shapes as they are. It tries to explain them. The brain fills in missing details, adds meaning where none is present, and matches what it sees to something familiar. Faces are one of the most familiar forms humans know, so the brain uses the face template a lot. There's also a psychological comfort to it. Humans dislike uncertainty. When we look at a chaotic pattern, the brain tries to organize it into something recognizable. This reduces stress because identifying something, even incorrectly, feels safer than facing ambiguity. Seeing a face in a plug socket makes the world feel more structured. The random becomes understandable. There's a curious emotional side to pareidolia as well. Sometimes we project moods into the imagined faces. A car might look angry. A tree might look surprised. A tile might look happy. This happens because humans naturally assign emotion to faces. When we see a face-like pattern, our brain activates the same neural regions used for real facial recognition. The brain does not completely separate real from imagined. It reacts emotionally even when the face is unreal. This behavior is so powerful that it appears very early in life. Babies recognize faces before they recognize almost anything else. They even respond to face-like designs such as two dots with one lower dot suggesting a mouth. This instinct continues throughout adulthood. Seeing faces in objects is not a sign of hallucination, mental illness, instability, or imagination gone wild. It is simply a result of how well the brain is designed to detect social information. In fact, it shows how fast and automatic our perception system works. We do not choose to see these faces, the brain does it instantly and without conscious effort. Interestingly, artists and designers sometimes use this effect intentionally. Cartoon characters, emojis, toys, and product packaging often rely on face-like patterns to create emotional connection. When something seems to look at us, we respond with warmth or curiosity. It triggers our brain's social circuits. Some people see these imaginary faces more often than others, especially those who are creative, sensitive, imaginative, or highly observant. But every human sees them at some point. It is part of our shared neurological blueprint. So seeing faces in random patterns is not just a quirky habit. It is a window into how the human brain interprets the world. It reveals our need for connection, our instinct for meaning, and our ancient survival mechanisms. It shows how much of perception is shaped not by the outside world, but by the brain's internal expectations. It is one of the strangest, most fascinating reminders that our minds are always searching for familiarity, significance, and emotion, even in places where none was intended. Forgetting why we entered a room. Forgetting why we entered a room is one of the most common experiences humans share, yet it can feel strangely embarrassing or mysterious when it happens. You walk with intention and purpose. You step through a doorway. Suddenly it's gone. Like someone erased your thoughts. You stand there blank, confused, maybe even laughing at yourself, trying to remember what you were originally planning to do. You know you had a reason, it just vanished. The good news is that this is not a sign of memory problems, lack of intelligence, or distraction. It happens because of the way the brain organizes information and switches mental contexts. When you walk into a new room, your brain is exposed to a shift in environment. The brain works by linking memories and intentions to specific contexts. This means your intention, why I'm going there, is part of the mental environment of the place you came from. The doorway creates what scientists call an event boundary. When the brain experiences an event boundary, it files away the previous thought and prepares to process what is happening now. The brain has limited working memory, so crossing a boundary acts like a reset button, clearing the short-term plan. The moment you enter a new room, your brain prepares for new information instead of holding on to the old. There is also a survival explanation. Human minds evolved to notice changes in surroundings. Thousands of years ago, entering a new area meant potentially facing threats, predators, unfamiliar food sources, or new social dynamics. The brain learned to prioritize environmental awareness. Today, entering a simple living room or kitchen does not involve danger, but the brain runs the same ancient pattern. Focus on the new environment first, internal intention second. Another layer of the explanation involves attention. Intention requires conscious attention to stay active. When you step into another room, attention shifts to visual cues. Objects, colors, lighting, sounds, smells. Your brain begins processing new sensory information. The original intention gets pushed aside because the brain can't handle too many conscious tasks at once. It is not failure, it is normal prioritization. Stress, multitasking, and mental load also play roles. When your mind is full of unrelated thoughts, the small intention of, "I need something from that room," becomes less stable. As soon as the environment changes, the mind allows the weakest task to drop. You forget because your brain is already juggling dozens of responsibilities, plans, emotions, decisions, reminders, and subconscious processes. Interestingly, forgetting why you entered a room often lasts only seconds. Once you retrace your steps, stand where you originally had the thought, or see something associated with the task, the memory returns. That's because the cue lives in the context of the original space. The moment you expose your brain to familiar context again, the intention resurfaces. Another important point is that this behavior occurs in everyone. Teenagers, adults, older people, highly organized thinkers, even people with strong memory skills. Researchers have observed that it has nothing to do with intelligence. It's simply how the brain codes temporary intentions. This behavior also reveals how humans are wired for tasks. The brain handles what I need to do differently from why I need to do it. Short-term tasks are fragile. They disappear easily if the brain shifts into problem-solving mode or environmental awareness mode. When a doorway interrupts the flow of attention, the intention gets temporarily disconnected. Even emotional state influences this effect. If you are stressed, busy, or distracted, your brain is more likely to drop the intention when you cross a doorway. If you are calm and present, you will forget less often because attention is steadier. So forgetting why you entered a room is not a flaw. It is a natural part of how the brain organizes and protects mental energy. It keeps your processing system efficient. It prioritizes new information. It responds to environmental changes. It is a biological habit that shows how adaptable and reactive our minds truly are. In the end, this behavior is one of those small but fascinating reminders that the human brain is constantly switching gears, handling information, filtering stimuli, sorting intentions, storing memories, and managing awareness. It is not a mistake. It is a demonstration of just how complex and beautifully dynamic the mind really is. Checking the time but immediately forgetting it. Checking the time but immediately forgetting it is one of those strangely universal human behaviors. You tap your phone, glance at a clock, look at your watch, or peek at the oven display. And within seconds, you realize you have no idea what time it is. You check again, still confused. Sometimes you check it a third time as though your brain simply refuses to record it. This experience feels odd, even frustrating. But there is a very real psychological and neurological reason behind why it happens. It is not memory failure, and it is not lack of awareness. It is the brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. When you look at the time, perception and memory are two separate processes. Perception is the act of seeing the time, while memory is the act of storing that information. If your mind is occupied with something else, the brain receives the sensory input, the numbers on the clock. but it does not encode them deeply enough to remember. In simpler words, you saw it, but you didn't really process it. You collected the information but did not store it. Why? Because the brain prioritizes tasks based on meaning, not based on what your eyes see if seeing the time is not emotionally or mentally significant at the moment. The brain doesn't invest effort into storing it. It treats it as a quick sensory check instead of an important event. You might be thinking about something else, planning something, worrying about something, remembering something, or deciding something. Whatever that mental activity is, the brain prioritizes it above the number on the clock. Another big factor is automatic behavior. Checking the time is often a habit, not a conscious act. We do it without full intention. The brain treats habitual actions differently than thoughtful ones. When a behavior becomes automatic, the brain processes it shallowly, like background noise. The intention, "What time is it?" fades as soon as you glance away, because the action was performed automatically without full engagement. It is similar to opening your refrigerator without remembering why, or driving on autopilot without recalling parts of the trip. This behavior also relates to attention overload. The mind is constantly managing thoughts, emotions, planning, sensory input, internal dialogue, and subconscious processing. When attention is divided across many tasks, the brain cannot deeply encode simple data like the time. The moment you look away, the brain shifts focus to whatever was occupying it before. You lose the information not because you forgot, but because the brain never saved it in the first place. Stress plays a role too. When someone is anxious, overwhelmed, or mentally busy, the brain is in a fast processing mode. Stress increases mental chatter, increases cortisol levels, and speeds up cognitive activity. In this fast mode, tasks like checking the time are processed too quickly to stick. That is why people under pressure often check the time repeatedly. The brain cannot store the information because it's too occupied with stress signals and emotional responses. Interestingly, the behavior also appears when someone is bored. When the mind is disengaged or unstimulated, attention becomes slippery. The brain drifts, daydreams, wanders. It checks the time looking for stimulation or direction, but the lack of meaning causes the information to vanish again. The time is not emotionally relevant, so the brain lets it go. This behavior has evolutionary roots. Human brains evolved to prioritize threats, opportunities, and social signals, not numbers on a clock. Thousands of years ago, remembering the exact position of the sun mattered less than detecting danger or opportunity. Today, even though the modern environment has changed, the brain's prioritization system remains ancient. It saves only what feels important. Another fascinating point is that checking the time immediately forgetting it is not a sign of weak memory. People with excellent memory experience it too. It is also not a sign of aging or decline. Young people, students, parents, professionals, even scientists and doctors do it. It is a universal quirk of attention and cognition. The key idea is this: the brain does not store information unless attention attaches meaning to it. When checking the time, the brain often has no emotional meaning attached, so it slips away instantly. This is natural, normal, and built into the architecture of the mind. So when someone checks the time and immediately forgets it, they are not careless or absent-minded. They are simply human with a brain that prioritizes emotional relevance, mental focus, and cognitive efficiency over raw sensory input. Talking to pets like they're people. Talking to pets like they're people is one of the most charming and universal human habits. Whether it's a dog, cat, bird, hamster, rabbit, turtle, or even a lizard, many people find themselves speaking to their animal companions as though the pet fully understands language, tone, emotion, and meaning. We ask them questions, we explain things to them, We tell them about our day. We comfort them. We even apologize or negotiate with them. This behavior may seem amusing, but it actually reflects deep psychological and emotional mechanisms that serve important purposes for humans. The first reason we talk to pets like people is because humans are social creatures. Our brains evolved to communicate, connect, and bond. Pets become part of our emotional environment, so our communication instinct switches on automatically. When we look at a pet, our brain sees a living being with needs, feelings, and personality, so the brain reacts the same way it would with a human, through verbal communication. Our words may not fully make sense to the pet, but the connection behind them absolutely does. Another reason is emotional expression. Humans need to express emotions in order to feel mentally balanced. Pets provide a safe space to express feelings without judgment. You can tell your pet that you're tired, sad, excited, or confused. You can talk through your thoughts. You can comfort yourself by speaking out loud. Pets never criticize, interrupt, argue, or embarrass you. This creates a sense of emotional security. The pet becomes a quiet, non-judgmental companion, and speaking to them helps people regulate emotions. Talking to pets also strengthens the bond between human and animal. Pets may not understand full sentences, but they understand tone, energy, facial expressions, and emotional intention. When you talk to a pet with affection, the pet feels warmth through your tone. When you speak gently, the pet feels safe. When you use an upbeat voice, the pet feels joy. This verbal communication builds trust and closeness the same way it does between people. Another reason humans talk to pets is because we naturally project thoughts, feelings, and personalities onto them. The brain tends to anthropomorphize, meaning it assigns human traits to non-human beings. This happens not only with pets, but also with toys, cars, plants, and even objects. But with pets, the projection is stronger because pets respond emotionally. They move, they react, they express curiosity, attention, excitement, or fear. So talking to them feels instinctive. Talking to pets also satisfies a social need. When someone feels lonely or emotionally isolated, speaking to a pet fills the psychological gap. The act of talking makes the brain feel connected, even if the conversation is one-sided. This is why elderly people, children, and people living alone often form especially strong verbal interactions with their pets. The pet becomes part of their emotional support system. There is also a cognitive benefit. When people talk to pets, they organize their thoughts more clearly. Speaking out loud helps the brain process feelings and thoughts. The pet becomes a silent listener, allowing the mind to release pressure. Many people talk to pets during decision-making moments without realizing it. The pet isn't giving advice, but talking through it helps the brain think more clearly. Interestingly, talking to pets like humans is not silly or childish. It is actually a sign of empathy and emotional intelligence. People who speak to their pets tend to be more caring, nurturing, compassionate, and attuned to relationships. It reflects a higher capacity for connection. Even though pets may not understand full language, they do understand emotional patterns. Dogs, for example, react to vocal tone. Cats react to body language. Birds respond to rhythm and pitch. The communication is meaningful on an emotional level, even if not on a linguistic level. So while your pet might not understand every word, they absolutely understand your emotional intention. So talking to pets like they are people is not strange at all. It is a deeply human behavior rooted in connection, empathy, emotional expression, psychological safety, and companionship. It reveals the power of human relationships and shows that communication is not only about words, but about emotional presence. Feeling phantom vibrations from phones. Phantom vibrations from phones is one of the strangest modern human experiences. yet millions of people around the world feel it. You're sitting quietly, walking or working, when suddenly you feel a buzzing sensation in your pocket, on your leg, or near your hip. It feels exactly like a phone vibrating. You reach for your device, expecting a message or notification, only to realize your phone is silent, or not even with you. The vibration never happened. It was created entirely by your brain. This phenomenon seems odd, but it makes perfect sense when you understand the psychology and physiology behind it. The brain is constantly monitoring the body for signals, sensations, and important information. In the past, those signals helped us detect danger, opportunities, or communication. Today, phones have replaced many traditional alert signals. Notifications, alerts, and vibrations have become deeply tied to our social interactions, and the brain treats them as important. Every time someone checks their phone, receives a message, feels anticipation, or experiences anxiety, the brain strengthens that association. Eventually, the brain becomes so tuned to expecting a vibration that it creates one when none is there. The brain is not malfunctioning when this happens. It is anticipating. Just like someone expecting footsteps may hear sounds that aren't real, or someone waiting for a doorbell may sense it, the mind creates phantom sensations based on expectation. The brain learned to interpret tiny muscle twitches, shifts in clothing, or nervous signals as vibrations. It does this to avoid missing something that feels socially significant. Another reason phantom vibrations occur is because humans process information faster than they can consciously interpret it. The nervous system sends signals to the brain constantly. Most of these signals are filtered out: sensations from fabric, body hair, muscle tension, and micro movements. When the brain is on alert mode for potential communication, it may mistakenly label one of these weak signals as a phone vibration. It's not a glitch. It's a misinterpretation of normal sensory activity. Phantom vibrations also reflect how deeply phones are integrated into emotional and social life. Many people associate their phones with connection, validation, responsibility, urgency, or anxiety. The possibility of missing a call, message, reminder, or notification keeps the brain attentive. This is especially true when someone is waiting for an important message or dealing with stress. Emotional anticipation amplifies sensory misinterpretations. There is also a neurological explanation involving habit loops. When someone checks their phone many times throughout the day, the brain forms a conditioned response. The slightest sensation on the leg triggers the urge to look at the phone. It doesn't matter whether the vibration was real, the brain responds as though it was. This is similar to the way someone may think they heard their name in a crowd or thought they saw something move in their peripheral vision. The brain favors safety over accuracy. Phantom vibrations do not indicate illness, memory issues, or psychological instability. Studies show that even medical professionals, engineers, scientists, and highly logical thinkers experience them. In fact, the more connected someone is to digital communication, especially through work or relationships, the more likely they are to experience phantom vibrations. It is not a weakness. It is a reflection of how adaptive and sensitive the human brain is. This phenomenon also reveals something fascinating about perception. The brain produces a surprising amount of our reality. Much of what we feel or sense is created by the brain's interpretation, not by literal physical events. The same mechanism that creates phantom phone vibrations also explains phantom limb sensations in amputees, phantom ringing, or the feeling of someone tapping your shoulder when no one is there. In small ways, phantom vibrations teach us how powerful expectations are. The brain tries to predict the future. It fills in gaps. It prepares us. It rarely leaves communication signals to chance. This is not a flaw. It's an instinctive survival mechanism shaped by evolution, adapted to modern life. So phantom vibrations from phones are not delusions or weirdness. They are a natural outcome of the brain's anticipation system, sensory interpretation, emotional expectation, and deeply conditioned habits. The mind is simply trying to stay connected, responsive, and aware, even when no real signal exists. Picking at scabs or skin is one of those very common human behaviors that almost everyone experiences at different points in life. You may find yourself picking at a healing scab, peeling dry skin, scratching a rough patch, or removing a small piece of dead skin even when you know you should stop. You may even know it could hurt, bleed, or worsen the healing process, yet the impulse still takes over. This behavior seems strange and unnecessary, but when we understand the psychology and biology behind it, it makes much more sense. One of the simplest explanations lies in evolutionary biology. The body forms scabs to protect wounds, but scabs attract attention because they feel different from normal skin. Our ancestors were often exposed to dirt, insects, and infections. The brain developed ways to remove anything that felt foreign or irritating on the skin. Our modern environment is cleaner, but the ancient instinct remains. When the brain detects something on the skin that doesn't belong, like a scab, dead skin, or a bump, it gives the urge to remove it. Another reason people pick scabs or skin is because it gives a sense of relief or satisfaction. When dry or loose skin comes off easily, the brain releases a small burst of dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. This is the same chemical released when someone completes a task, cleans something, or removes something messy. The brain interprets the act of picking as fixing or cleaning. Even though we may know logically that picking doesn't help healing, the emotional brain reacts to the sense of completion. Stress and anxiety also make the behavior more likely. When someone is overwhelmed, nervous, or emotionally overloaded, repetitive actions like skin picking become a coping mechanism. It provides momentary distraction and gives the brain something simple and physical to focus on. Instead of thinking about a problem, the brain focuses on the sensation. Picking becomes a tiny escape, like tapping fingers, chewing nails, or fidgeting. There is also a sensory explanation. Scabs and dry skin often create uneven textures. Human brains are wired to prefer smoothness and symmetry. Irregular texture can subtly bother the brain, especially if someone has a heightened sense of touch or sensitivity. Picking becomes a way of correcting the texture, even though the act may cause more irregularity later. The urge isn't conscious. It's sensory-driven. People often pick when they are bored, distracted, or lost in thought. They may not even realize they're doing it. That happens because skin picking becomes a habit loop. The brain recognizes the sensation, reacts automatically, and does not require conscious decision-making. The same mechanism explains habits like tapping feet, twirling hair, or biting the inside of cheeks. This behavior also connects to healing. As wounds repair, nerves become more sensitive. Itching is part of the healing process. Scratching or picking relieves that itch temporarily. But because healing is ongoing, the itch returns, creating a cycle. The person isn't trying to harm themselves. Their nervous system is responding to the microscopic changes happening beneath the skin's surface. Not everyone picks with the same intensity, but almost everyone does it occasionally. It becomes a concern only when someone picks to the point of hurting themselves or preventing healing. But for most people, it's simply one of those quirky human behaviors that reflect how our brain interacts with our skin. Interestingly, children and adults both engage in this behavior. It's not a sign of immaturity or lack of discipline. It's a reflection of instinct, nervous system behavior, emotional regulation, and sensory processing. The brain constantly tries to make sense of the body, smooth imperfections, reduce unfamiliar sensations, and create comfort. Picking at scabs or skin may feel strange, but it reveals how complex the relationship between body and mind really is. It shows that healing is not just a physical process. It influences neurological pathways, emotional states, and behavioral habits. It shows that humans are deeply responsive to small bodily changes, often without conscious awareness. So picking at scabs or skin is not bizarre or embarrassing. It's a natural behavior tied to biology, emotion, sensory processing, and instinct. It reminds us that even the smallest actions have deep psychological roots, and that humans constantly interact with their own bodies in ways that reflect ancient instincts still alive in modern life. Laughing at the worst possible moments. Laughing at the worst possible moments is something almost every human has experienced, even though it can feel horribly awkward, confusing, and embarrassing. You might laugh at a funeral during a serious conversation, while someone shares something emotional, or in a situation that clearly requires empathy and seriousness. The laughter feels involuntary, almost like your body turned against you. But instead of being a sign of cruelty, insensitivity, or disrespect, this behavior has deep psychological explanations. It is not about making fun of others. It is an instinctive reaction the brain uses to cope with uncomfortable emotional intensity. The first thing to understand is that laughter is not only a response to humor. Laughter is also a pressure release system. When the brain becomes overwhelmed by emotional tension, whether sadness, shock, discomfort, or anxiety, laughter can appear unexpectedly. It emerges because the nervous system needs a rapid way to discharge emotional energy. Serious or intense situations raise stress hormones like adrenaline, and laughter functions like a valve releasing some of that emotional pressure. Laughter at the wrong moment often happens when we are confused about what we are supposed to feel. Serious situations can create emotional chaos. The mind tries to stay composed, but the emotions are too heavy. The laughter is the brain's attempt to self-regulate. Emotionally, it's like a mini reset button, a moment of psychological escape from the discomfort. Another major explanation is social anxiety. When people feel judged, exposed, or unsure of how others expect them to react, the brain becomes overloaded. Nervous laughter appears as a response to uncertainty. It is the body trying to say, "I don't know how to handle this." It's the same mechanism that makes people giggle when they're nervous before speaking publicly or when they're caught off guard. The laughter is not joy, it's stress. There is also a biological connection. Humans evolved to use laughter as a bonding tool. Laughter signals safety, connection, playfulness, and release. When the situation feels tense, the brain attempts to restore social equilibrium through laughter. Even though it may not be appropriate, the brain is still trying to build a moment of relief. It is trying to soothe itself and others. Interestingly, this behavior is extremely common among empathetic people. The more emotional sensitivity someone has, the more overwhelming serious situations can feel inside. Their nervous system reacts strongly, and laughter becomes the unexpected method of coping. So ironically, people who laugh at the wrong moment may actually care deeply. They are simply flooded with emotion. The mind-body connection also contributes. When we are stressed, muscles tighten, breathing becomes shallow, and the brain starts searching for an outlet. Laughter briefly relaxes the body. It releases endorphins. It lowers tension. It gives the brain a momentary break from emotional heaviness, even if that relief comes at an awkward time. Sometimes laughter comes from shock. When something happens that the brain didn't expect, laughter can appear as a confusion response. Shock disrupts normal emotional processing, and laughter fills the gap. It's the same reason people sometimes laugh when they trip, fall, or break something. The brain doesn't know what emotional label to attach, so it defaults to laughter. Another fascinating aspect is that laughter can be a way to avoid vulnerability. When a situation becomes too emotional, laughter protects the person from feeling fully exposed. It acts like armor. It creates a psychological barrier. It is the mind's attempt to stay in control of overwhelming feelings. It's important to recognize that laughing at the wrong time does not make someone bad or disrespectful. The laughter is not chosen. It is not intentional. It is a nervous system response to emotional confusion. Everyone does it, no matter how polite, caring, or mature they are. It is a deeply human behavior reflecting the complexity of emotion, stress, social expectations, and psychological self-defense. So when someone laughs at the worst possible moment, it doesn't mean they lack empathy. It means their brain is trying desperately to process a moment that feels too big, too emotional, or too confusing. Laughter is the nervous system trying to help, even though it comes out in an inconvenient way. It reveals the depth of human emotion rather than the lack of it. Cringing at their own voice recordings. Cringing at your own voice recordings is an almost universal experience. Many people will happily speak all day long, feeling natural and expressive. But the moment they hear their voice played back, they suddenly feel embarrassed, uncomfortable, or surprised. The voice sounds higher, thinner, flatter, or more awkward than expected. People react with, "Is that really me?" or "I sound weird." Yet what feels strange has a clear and logical explanation rooted in how the brain interprets sound, identity, and self-perception. The first thing to understand is that you never hear your voice the way others do. When you speak, you experience your voice in two ways at once. One is through the air passing from your mouth to your ears, the external path. But the second is internal. Vibrations travel through your skull bones and tissues into your inner ear. These internal vibrations add depth, warmth, and richness to the voice you hear. This is why your real-time voice sounds fuller, deeper, and smoother to you. But when you listen to a recording, that internal resonance disappears. You hear your voice only through the external path, exactly the way others hear it. So suddenly the voice sounds brighter or thinner because the deeper tones you are used to internally are missing. The recording feels wrong not because the sound is flawed, but because your brain has spent a lifetime hearing a different version. Another psychological reason for cringing is that your recorded voice reveals aspects of your communication that you don't normally notice. Tone, rhythm, pitch, hesitation, awkwardness, or emotional expression. When you listen back, you become hyper-aware of these details. This self-awareness triggers discomfort because humans are naturally sensitive to anything involving social perception. The fear of sounding strange is related to the fear of judgment, rejection, or embarrassment. There's also a concept called self-voice mismatch. Your brain has built a strong identity around how you think you sound. When the recording doesn't match that inner identity, your mind reacts almost as if hearing an unfamiliar person. The brain dislikes mismatch between expectation and reality, so it responds with discomfort. Another key reason is that hearing your voice as others hear it exposes vulnerability. The voice is one of the most personal parts of identity. We use it to express emotion, to connect with others, and to shape how people perceive us. When you hear something that feels off compared to your internal sense of self, it can feel like a loss of control. The cringe is your brain saying, "This doesn't feel like me." There's also the issue of critical listening. When you speak normally, you focus on meaning. You care about what you are saying. But when you listen to a recording, you focus on how you sound. Your attention shifts from communication to performance, and humans are naturally harshest on themselves. You notice every imperfection, every pitch variation, every pause, even things others barely register. The experience is intensified because recordings remove emotional context. When you speak, you can read body language, eye contact, facial reactions, and tone. When you play back your voice alone, those social cues disappear, making the speech feel exposed and raw. Interestingly, people cringe less at their voice over time if they are repeatedly recorded. Singers, broadcasters, podcasters, teachers, or public speakers often adapt. Their brain adjusts to the external version of their voice and learns to accept it as part of their identity. Cringing at recordings is also connected to the brain's negativity bias. The mind pays more attention to flaws than strengths. You may actually sound more pleasant, expressive, warm, or interesting than you think, but the brain highlights imperfections out of protective instinct. It wants you to improve social presentation, so it exaggerates what it sees as mistakes. Another important point: no one else thinks your voice sounds as strange as you think it does. To others, your voice is familiar and completely normal. People do not judge the way you judge yourself. The cringe is internal, not external. So cringing at your voice recordings is not a sign of insecurity or low confidence. It is a natural combination of biology, perception mismatch, emotional identity, and the brain's protective tendencies. Almost every human experiences it, and it reflects not weakness but the complexity of how the brain constructs the sense of self. Imagining arguments that never even happened. Imagining arguments that never even happened is a surprisingly common human behavior, even though it feels strange and sometimes mentally exhausting. You may find yourself replaying a past situation in your head, imagining what someone might have said, imagining how you would respond, and sometimes even arguing with someone who isn't actually present. These imagined disagreements can get emotional, even though nothing is actually happening in reality. It can leave you stressed, upset, or mentally drained, all from something that never occurred. But the truth is, this behavior makes sense once we explore what the brain is trying to do. The first key reason this happens is emotional self-protection. The brain dislikes uncertainty. When you interact with others, especially when emotions are involved, there is always a risk of misunderstanding, judgment, conflict, or hurt feelings. Imagining arguments is the brain's way of preparing for those possibilities in advance. Your mind is rehearsing, trying to avoid getting caught off guard. Even if the argument is unlikely, the brain runs simulations to keep you ready. This behavior is also tied to overthinking. When you care about how others see you, when you worry about relationships, or when you value clarity, the brain tries to predict every possible outcome. The imagined argument becomes a mental rehearsal for future communication. Your brain is basically saying, let's go through all the possible emotional scenarios so we don't feel vulnerable later. It is a form of emotional armor. Another explanation has to do with unresolved feelings. When something is left unsaid, the brain keeps circling back to it. The imagined argument becomes a way to express what you wish you could say, but didn't. It is a safe, private space for emotional release. Even if the real conversation never happens, the imagined one serves the purpose of letting feelings out. There's also a neurological aspect. The brain uses the same networks for imagination that it uses for real interactions. When you imagine an argument, the brain reacts emotionally, almost as if it's happening in reality. This is why imagined conflicts can trigger stress hormones, elevated heart rate, or irritation, even though no confrontation took place. The brain is practicing emotional defense. This behavior often appears in socially sensitive people who care deeply about relationships, harmony, fairness, or emotional safety. It doesn't come from wanting drama, it comes from wanting clarity, it comes from wanting to be understood, it comes from wanting to avoid hurt. Imagined arguments can also reflect fear. Fear of disappointing others, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being taken advantage of. The imagined argument lets you role-play confidence, boundaries, or assertiveness that you might struggle with in real life. It becomes a mental space where you are able to say what you normally hold back. But it can also reflect frustration. When you feel wronged, dismissed, or ignored, your mind wants to regain control. The imagined argument becomes a way to win back emotional balance. In your mind, you can express the anger or pain that you felt, unable to show outwardly. Another layer of explanation is cognitive dissonance. When your thoughts, feelings, and actions don't line up, the imaginary argument becomes your brain's attempt to resolve that internal conflict. You are trying to match your emotional truth with the outside world, even if only in imagination. It's also important to note that imagining arguments isn't a sign of madness, instability, or immaturity. It's mental processing. It's emotional organization. It's actually a sign that your brain is actively trying to understand relationships, protect your emotional well-being, and prepare you for communication. However, when it becomes excessive, it can increase anxiety. When thoughts run in circles, repeating conflict that never happened, it drains emotional energy. But moderate amounts are natural, especially when something feels unresolved or deeply important to you. In essence, imagining arguments is not about being negative. It is about trying to feel safe, prepared, emotionally understood, and protected. It is a deeply human way of navigating uncertainty in relationships and communication. It shows just how much we care about connection, truth, fairness, and emotional clarity, even when everything takes place only in the mind. Talking to ourselves like it's normal. Talking to ourselves like it's normal is something people of every age, culture, and personality do, even if they only do it quietly or in their heads. You might talk to yourself when you're stressed, when you're solving a problem, when you're trying to remember something, or when you're emotionally overwhelmed. Sometimes you do it out loud, sometimes under your breath, and sometimes silently in your mind. And while people may think this behavior is strange or embarrassing, it is actually one of the most natural mental functions the brain uses. Understanding why we do it helps reveal how intelligent and adaptive the human mind really is. The first reason humans talk to themselves is because it helps the brain organize thoughts. Speech is not only for communication with others, it is also a tool for thinking. When you speak, you translate thoughts into language, and language brings clarity. A thought can feel vague or confusing when held silently in the mind, but when spoken, it becomes structured. You can reason through things more clearly when words shape your thoughts. It's like sorting scattered puzzle pieces into a picture. Talking to ourselves also helps with memory. When you say something out loud, you activate multiple parts of the brain: the thinking center, the language center, and auditory processing. This strengthens memory and recall. That's why people repeat information to themselves when trying to remember phone numbers, instructions, or dates. The voice reinforces the memory through repetition. Another reason we talk to ourselves is emotional regulation. When someone is anxious, overwhelmed, or frustrated, speaking to themselves provides comfort. Telling yourself, "It's okay," or "I can handle this," or "calm down" is a way of self-soothing. Humans evolved to use language to manage emotions, and self-talk is the private version of emotional support. It gives stability, like an inner voice of reassurance. We also talk to ourselves when making decisions. When choices feel confusing or when fear blocks clarity, speaking out loud helps separate thoughts. It allows the brain to weigh options one at a time. Talking to ourselves creates distance between emotion and logic, making decisions feel less overwhelming. It becomes a way of coaching ourselves through uncertainty. Problem solving is another reason self-talk exists. When we encounter a challenge, Talking to ourselves can help break complex problems into smaller steps. Athletes do this. Students do this. Experts do this. Even children do this while figuring out how to fix toys or tie a shoe. The brain uses self-talk as a form of internal guidance. There is also a deep psychological reason tied to identity. Our inner voice is a part of who we are. It reflects values, beliefs, memories, goals, fears, and hopes. Talking to ourselves keeps the inner world organized. Without internal speech, our thoughts would feel fragmented. Self-talk is like the mind's narrator, keeping the story of our life coherent. Interestingly, children talk to themselves out loud much more than adults. This is not immaturity, it is healthy development. As children grow, this external speech slowly becomes internal speech. Adults still talk internally, but often more quietly. The behavior never disappears. It simply becomes more private. Talking to yourself doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It does not mean you are lonely, unstable, or unusual. In fact, research shows that people who use self-talk are better at emotional control, memory, planning, and focus. Even psychologists, surgeons, pilots, and athletes use self-talk deliberately to maintain accuracy and confidence. The brain performs best when thoughts are verbalized. Sometimes people make jokes about talking to themselves, but the truth is, humans are constantly doing it. Anyone who reads silently to themselves, rehearses conversations, analyzes choices internally, or voices encouragement in difficult moments is engaging in self-talk. It is one of the quiet engines of human cognition. So talking to ourselves is not weird. It is a sign of a functioning, adaptive, intelligent mind. It is the brain using language to organize thoughts, regulate emotions, strengthen memory, reduce stress, solve problems, and express identity. It is not just normal. It is necessary. It shows that our inner world is active, thoughtful, and responsive. Daydreaming in the middle of a task. Daydreaming in the middle of a task is something so many humans experience, yet it often puzzles us when it happens. You might be reading a paragraph, writing something down, working on your computer, washing dishes, or listening to someone speak, and then suddenly you drift away. Your mind slips into a separate world. You imagine scenarios, memories, plans, fantasies, worries, or creative ideas. Time momentarily slows and awareness fades. Eventually, you snap back and realize you stopped paying attention to what you were doing. This behavior may feel strange or inconvenient, but it is actually a natural part of how the brain works, and it reveals a lot about human cognition and emotion. The first thing to understand is that the brain is not built to focus constantly. Attention is a limited resource. When you focus for a period of time, the brain needs short breaks to recover. Daydreaming is one of the ways the brain refreshes itself. Just like muscles need rest after exercise, the mind needs moments to wander. That brief escape gives the brain space to reset, which actually helps maintain focus in the long run. Another important reason people daydream during tasks is that the mind is processing information in the background. Daydreaming allows us to reflect, digest experiences, solve problems subconsciously, and connect ideas that seem unrelated at the surface. Many creative insights happen during daydreaming. Scientists, writers, inventors, and artists often report breakthroughs while mentally drifting. The brain uses daydreaming as a workspace for creativity. Emotion also plays a role. When the brain is dealing with something stressful, emotional, unresolved, or important, it may shift attention inward to process those feelings. It isn't that you wanted to stop focusing, it's that your brain temporarily prioritizes emotional processing over the task at hand. This is especially likely when something is bothering you or when you're anticipating something in your life. Tasks that are repetitive, familiar, or not mentally stimulating are also more likely to trigger daydreaming. When the brain already knows how to perform the activity, it doesn't need full cognitive attention. The mind frees itself to explore thoughts, memories, fantasies, planning, or imagination. That's why people daydream while cleaning, showering, walking, or commuting. The task is automatic, so the mind seeks stimulation elsewhere. Interestingly, daydreaming is connected to the brain's default mode network. This network activates whenever your mind is not focused on the outside world. It handles introspection, imagination, autobiographical memory, and long-term planning. When you daydream, the brain taps into this network to reflect on the past, imagine the future, rehearse possibilities, or understand yourself better. It is the brain's internal storytelling mode. Daydreaming also has a protective function. When a situation feels boring, emotionally draining, or mentally tiring, the mind creates a temporary escape. It gives the brain relief. It produces small bursts of dopamine, the reward chemical, especially when the daydream is comforting, hopeful, exciting, or inspiring. In this way, daydreaming helps manage mood and emotional balance. Some people worry that daydreaming means they lack discipline, but that is not true. Even highly successful, highly focused individuals daydream. The difference is that they learn to return to focus afterward. The wandering mind is part of being human. It shows that the brain is dynamic, imaginative, and emotionally responsive. There's also something remarkable about daydreaming. It helps people understand themselves. When you drift, your mind reveals your desires, fears, hopes, goals, and unresolved questions. Daydreaming is a mirror into your inner world. It gives insight into what truly matters to you, even if you don't consciously realize it. So daydreaming in the middle of a task is not a flaw or failure. It is a fundamental part of how the brain works. It supports creativity, emotional processing, problem-solving, self-reflection, and mental rest. It may interrupt your task temporarily, but it also refreshes the mind and connects inner thoughts in meaningful ways. In the end, this behavior shows how deeply human the mind is. Not mechanical, not linear, but flowing, imaginative, emotional, and capable of drifting between the external world and the internal one. Daydreaming is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that your brain is active, alive, and processing life from the inside out. Randomly remembering old conversations. Randomly remembering old conversations is something nearly everyone experiences. Even though it often feels strange, pointless, or emotionally uncomfortable. You may be sitting quietly, driving, washing dishes, or lying in bed when suddenly your mind brings up a conversation from weeks, months, or even years ago. It could be something small, something awkward, something meaningful, or even something completely forgettable. The memory arrives without warning, and you find yourself replaying the words, the tone, the emotion, or even what you wish you had said or not said. This can be confusing, but when we understand how memory and emotion are connected, it becomes completely logical. The first thing to know is that the brain never forgets emotional interactions easily. Conversations involve feelings, whether they are positive, embarrassing, confusing, painful, or unresolved. The brain stores emotional memory differently than neutral information. Even if you forget faces, dates, or names, the emotional memory of the conversation stays because feelings leave deeper impressions. When the brain senses a similar emotional state in the present, it triggers old memories automatically, like a match striking a spark. Another explanation is that the brain constantly reviews past experiences to learn from them. Humans evolved to replay interactions so they could understand what worked socially and what didn't. Even though you aren't thinking about survival, the brain is doing what it has always done, analyzing communication. It tries to improve your approach, understand your reactions, and mentally prepare you for future interactions. You might replay a conversation because your mind wants to decode what happened. Sometimes these memories resurface because they are unresolved. You may have unfinished emotional business, perhaps you regret something, or you never said what you felt, or you misunderstood someone, or you didn't get closure. The memory returns because the brain is trying to organize emotional loose ends. It wants clarity, even if the moment has long passed. Randomly remembering old conversations also happens when the brain makes associations. You hear a tone of voice similar to the one in the memory. You smell something familiar. You see a person with a similar expression. You feel a similar mood. Without consciously realizing it, your brain links the present moment to a past one through sensory similarity. The past rises because the brain spotted a subtle connection. In some cases, old conversations appear when the mind wanders, especially when you're understimulated. When the brain has extra processing capacity, like during repetitive tasks or quiet moments, it dives into stored thoughts. Past conversations are easy targets because they involve emotion and carry unresolved meaning. This is why memories often pop up at night or during downtime. Another important part of this behavior is self-reflection. Old conversations help you understand yourself. The words you said reveal your beliefs, fears, insecurities, strengths, and emotional growth. Sometimes the memory returns because your subconscious mind wants you to realize something. It wants you to see how much you have changed or how your relationships shaped you. The brain also replays conversations for rehearsing purposes. You might be preparing emotionally without realizing it. If you replay an argument, your brain may be teaching you how to respond better next time. If you replay something funny or kind, your brain may be reminding you of connection and warmth. The brain uses past conversations as emotional training material. Interestingly, this behavior happens to people of every age and personality. It is not a sign of overthinking or insecurity. It is part of how memory and emotion work together. The brain stores social interactions in deep places, and anything meaningful will eventually return, even if unexpectedly. Sometimes people feel embarrassed when these memories come up, especially if the conversation wasn't perfect. But it's important to remember that the brain isn't judging you when it brings these memories back. It is learning, processing, and emotionally integrating. Randomly remembering old conversations is evidence that humans are emotional beings, not machines. We don't simply store facts. We store feelings, tone, intention, trust, rejection, connection, and personal meaning. The fact that these memories return long after the conversation is over shows just how deeply our minds value relationships, communication, and emotional understanding. Yawning when someone else yawns. Yawning when someone else yawns, also known as contagious yawning, is one of the strangest behaviors humans experience. You may not feel tired, bored, or sleepy, yet the moment you see someone yawn, hear them yawn, or even read about yawning, you suddenly feel the urge to do it too. It happens so automatically that you barely realize it. Some people laugh about it, others are puzzled, but the truth is that contagious yawning is actually a sign of something deeply human, rooted in empathy, social connection, and brain chemistry. The first thing to understand is that yawning itself is not just about sleepiness. Yawning regulates oxygen, brain temperature, mental alertness, and emotional readiness. When someone yawns, their brain is making adjustments to stay awake, alert, or mentally balanced. When your brain detects another person yawning, it may unconsciously mirror that adjustment. It's a biological synchronization between two nervous systems. Contagious yawning is strongly connected to empathy. Research has shown that people who have higher empathy, meaning they can sense others' emotions, care about others, and are socially attuned, are more likely to yawn when someone else does. When we see someone yawn, especially someone close to us, the brain automatically imitates their action. This mirroring happens because humans evolved to synchronize behavior within groups. Shared yawning helped ancient humans stay alert together, rest together, and respond to threats together. It kept early tribes socially bonded. The part of the brain involved in contagious yawning is the mirror neuron system. Mirror neurons fire both when you perform an action and when you see someone else perform that same action. These neurons allow humans to imitate, learn, empathize, and connect emotionally. They play a role in bonding, friendship, cooperation, and compassion. When someone yawns, mirror neurons react as if you are yawning too, creating the urge to copy them. Another interesting aspect is that contagious yawning rarely works the same way in very young children. Babies and toddlers who have not yet developed strong empathy usually do not yawn when others yawn. As children grow and become more socially aware, contagious yawning begins to appear. This shows that the behavior is not just physical, it is a social and emotional phenomenon. Contagious yawning also increases when you feel comfortable and connected to someone. People are more likely to mimic yawns of family, close friends, and people they care about than strangers. This suggests that yawning is part of human bonding, a subtle signal that says we are emotionally in sync. It is also possible to yawn simply by thinking about yawning. The brain is extremely sensitive to suggestion, especially when the behavior involves bodily functions that are regulated subconsciously. Reading about yawning, seeing a picture of someone yawning, or imagining yourself yawning can trigger the same response. The brain doesn't distinguish strongly between real and imagined triggers when it comes to bodily reflexes. Another explanation for contagious yawning relates to the brain's management of alertness. When someone near you yawns, your brain may interpret this as a cue that the environment is quiet or restful, prompting you to adjust your arousal level as well. It is the brain's way of maintaining group alertness or calmness depending on the situation. Interestingly, contagious yawning is not a flaw or quirk. It serves social benefits. It helps people synchronize their states of awareness. It helps people unconsciously coordinate moods. It reminds us that humans are connected through empathy, not just through spoken communication. Far from being strange or embarrassing, contagious yawning is actually a sign of healthy emotional functioning. It means your brain is capable of connecting with others, reading signals, responding intuitively, and engaging socially. It is a silent communication method that has existed for millions of years. So yawning when someone else yawns is not a random glitch in the mind. It is a result of empathy, mirror neurons, social bonding, subconscious communication, and ancient survival instincts that helped humans connect as groups. It shows how deeply intertwined our brains are with the people around us, even in something as simple and natural as a yawn. Apologizing for things out of our control. Apologizing for things out of our control is a behavior that many humans perform without even realizing it. You might say sorry when someone bumps into you, when you take up space, when you need help, when plans change unexpectedly, when you decline something, or when something happens that has nothing to do with you. It may seem unnecessary or even irrational, but it comes from deep emotional and social mechanisms. Understanding why we do this reveals a lot about empathy, identity, and the human desire for harmony. One of the biggest reasons people apologize for things they can't control is the need to maintain social peace. Humans evolved in groups, and cooperation was essential for survival. Conflict, even small interpersonal tension, could threaten stability. Our brains still react to potential conflict strongly. When someone apologizes quickly, even when they did nothing wrong, they are trying to smooth the interaction, lower discomfort, and signal goodwill. Sorry becomes a peace offering, a way to keep social harmony. Another explanation lies in empathy. People who are highly empathetic are extremely aware of others' feelings. When something inconvenient, uncomfortable, or stressful happens, even if it isn't their fault, they feel responsible for easing emotional tension. Saying sorry is their way of helping the other person feel supported. It's not about taking blame, it's about showing care. There's also the issue of perceived responsibility. Many humans grow up feeling they must be pleasant, agreeable, and helpful. They worry that asserting boundaries or allowing things to go wrong will make them seem rude or difficult. So they apologize as a form of subtle self-protection, hoping to avoid judgment or rejection. Sorry becomes a shield against what they fear others may think. Cultural influence also plays a part. In some cultures, politeness norms encourage constant apology as a sign of humility or respect. Saying sorry becomes a default expression, not because someone feels guilt, but because it's socially expected. They apologize to show they're considerate and aware of social harmony. Psychology gives another explanation. Uncertainty makes people nervous. When something unexpected happens, people apologize simply because they feel awkward. They don't know what emotion is appropriate, so sorry fills the space. It is a socially neutral word that signals, I don't want any tension between us. This behavior also connects to perfectionism. People who hold themselves to high emotional standards may feel guilty even when they shouldn't. Apologizing helps release internal pressure. It's an attempt to stay aligned with the image they want to project. Someone kind, responsible, and considerate. There is also self-worth involved. People who struggle with self-esteem may feel they are burdensome even when they are not. They apologize to avoid feeling like an inconvenience. The sorry is not really about the situation. It is about their relationship with themselves. But even though apologizing for things beyond our control seems irrational, it serves emotional purposes. It creates reassurance. It reduces uncertainty. It maintains closeness. It shows awareness of others. It reveals the brain's instinct to connect socially rather than risk emotional conflict. Interestingly, people who apologize unnecessarily often have strong relational intelligence. They are sensitive, thoughtful, and emotionally aware. The behavior feels awkward, but it arises from compassion, not weakness. However, when this habit becomes extreme, it can create problems. Constant apologizing may make someone seem overly submissive or responsible for things that aren't their duty. It may exhaust them emotionally because they try to manage situations that are not theirs to manage. But in moderation, it reflects kindness and connection. So when someone apologizes for things out of their control, it's not because they don't know the truth. It's because their brain prioritizes harmony, empathy, and emotional safety. It shows that humans are wired to protect relationships and reduce discomfort, even when logic says they shouldn't. In the end, it is a deeply human behavior, revealing how strongly we care about others, how much we value connection, and how the mind often chooses emotional peace over strict rationality. Feeling like someone is watching us. Feeling like someone is watching us is one of the most eerie yet incredibly common experiences in human psychology. It might happen while walking alone at night, sitting in a quiet room, turning your back to a doorway, or even when nothing logically suggests danger. The feeling arrives suddenly, a sense of awareness, tension, alertness. You may look over your shoulder, glance around the room, pause what you're doing, or check behind you. Most of the time you find nothing, and you go back to what you were doing. But the question remains, why does the brain do this? To understand this, First, consider that the human brain is wired for survival. Early humans lived in environments filled with predators, threats, and possible attacks. Being watched, hunted, or stalked was a real possibility. Our ancestors survived because their brains constantly scanned their surroundings. The feeling of being watched was never a flaw. It was a survival advantage. Those who sensed threats quickly had a higher chance of escaping danger. Today, we rarely face predators, but the ancient neurological wiring remains. The brain still runs survival instincts even when danger is unlikely. Another explanation involves a part of the brain called the amygdala, which detects threats and danger. The amygdala is highly sensitive and always alert behind the scenes. When it notices something uncertain, silence, darkness, unfamiliar spaces, or isolation, it becomes active. The amygdala would rather make a false alarm than miss a real threat, so the brain sends the uneasy feeling just in case. This is not paranoia or weakness. It is a protective mechanism. The sensation also relates to our sensitivity to gaze. Humans are social beings, and detecting whether someone is looking at us matters deeply. Our brains evolved to read facial expressions, eye contact, and social signals. Detecting attention from others helps in communication, danger awareness, bonding, and understanding intention. Even when no one is present, the brain keeps its gaze detection system on, ready to scan if needed. It is almost like psychological radar. There is also a psychological explanation involving uncertainty. When the brain doesn't have enough information, it fills the gaps. Darkness, silence, or empty spaces leave the brain without sensory data. The mind becomes more alert, trying to make sense of the environment. When the brain has incomplete information, it imagines possibilities, one of which is being watched. The feeling arises not because danger is real, but because the mind wants clarity. Social anxiety also plays a role. Humans are highly conscious of how they are perceived by others. Even when alone, the brain may simulate the awareness of judgment or observation. People who are sensitive, empathetic, or self-reflective may feel this more strongly. The mind rehearses social awareness even when no one is present. There is also a concept called hypervigilance. The brain temporarily increases awareness to stay safe. This happens when someone is stressed, overwhelmed, exhausted, or emotionally tense. The brain scans the environment more intensely, leading to the sensation of being watched. The brain is protecting you, not scaring you. Interestingly, this sensation teaches us something important about perception. The brain creates feelings not only from real stimuli, but from its expectations and memories. It is not reacting to the environment alone. It is reacting to the mind's interpretation of safety and threat. The feeling may also appear more at night because the brain has fewer sensory cues to rely on. Darkness reduces visual clarity, so the brain becomes alert to protect you. It prepares for potential danger even when there is none. Again, this is ancient survival logic, not irrational fear. It is important to note that everyone experiences this behavior. It is not a sign of instability, paranoia, or weakness. It is an ordinary human response rooted in evolution, neurobiology, and emotional processing. The brain would rather detect a false threat than miss a real one. So the feeling that someone is watching us is not strange at all. It is a glimpse into the ancient wisdom of the mind. It shows how deeply the brain cares about protection, awareness, and survival. It reminds us that our instincts are alive, even in safe environments. Instead of being a flaw, it is a subtle form of mental armor, a quiet biological guardian watching over us, checking the fridge repeatedly hoping something new appeared. Checking the fridge repeatedly hoping something new appeared is one of those habits that makes people laugh, yet almost everyone does it. You open the fridge, stare at the shelves, close it, walk away. Then come back a few minutes later and open it again, even though you know logically nothing has changed. It feels irrational, but there's a deep psychological explanation behind this behavior. It has less to do with hunger and more to do with curiosity, emotional regulation, habit, and the brain's need for stimulation. One of the main reasons people check the fridge repeatedly is that food is tied to comfort. When we are bored, stressed, or emotionally uncertain, the brain searches for small moments of reward. Food provides sensory pleasure, anticipation, and sometimes emotional soothing. Even if we aren't starving, the brain wonders, maybe there's something satisfying in here. It's not really about eating, it's about the hope of feeling better or distracted. Another explanation comes from conditioning. The brain remembers all the times you opened the fridge and found something enjoyable. Those memories create a small loop of expectation. The mind thinks, it happened before, maybe it will happen again. Even if you logically know nothing new is inside, the hope for surprise makes you check anyway. It's like a slot machine. Most of the time you get nothing, but the occasional reward keeps you coming back. We also check the fridge repeatedly because our brains crave novelty. Humans are wired to seek new experiences, new tastes, new sensations. When we are mentally understimulated, the brain looks for something to break the monotony. Opening the fridge is a quick search for novelty, even if we know the fridge hasn't magically updated itself. Another interesting reason involves decision-making. Sometimes you don't know what you want to eat, and your brain needs time to process it. When you reopen the fridge, you are revisiting the visual menu, hoping a clearer choice will appear. You are not expecting new items, you are hoping that clarity will arrive. The brain is browsing options, not ingredients. This behavior also involves emotional regulation. People often open the fridge when they feel restless, stressed, frustrated, lonely, or overwhelmed. The fridge becomes a symbolic space, a stable place that offers comfort, familiarity, and the potential for reward. You may not even want food, you want relief. The act of checking the fridge becomes a tiny ritual of reassurance. Another psychological factor is that humans associate the kitchen and fridge with safety and abundance. In many cultures, food represents security. When you are unsure what you want emotionally, you naturally return to the place that symbolizes comfort. The fridge feels like a quiet sanctuary for the brain. Habit also plays a role. When you repeatedly open the fridge out of boredom, the brain wires this action into an automatic routine. It becomes a reflex, not a conscious decision. Later, when you feel restless, your body walks there without thinking. The repetition trains your brain to see the fridge as a coping tool, even if you don't consciously intend to use it that way. There is also a bit of magical hope in this behavior, the irrational expectation that maybe something new might appear. Humans often hold tiny, hopeful fantasies like checking the mailbox even when you expect nothing, or refreshing a web page hoping for new content. The fridge becomes the physical version of that. Interestingly, this behavior does not indicate hunger issues, laziness, or lack of discipline. It simply reflects how our brains respond to emotional and cognitive needs. It shows that humans seek stimulation, comfort, and clarity even in the simplest objects. The fridge just happens to be the place our brain knows to check. So repeatedly opening the fridge wishing something new appeared is not silly at all. It's a small reflection of emotional needs, curiosity, and the search for comfort. It shows how the brain uses habits to soothe itself, how it prioritizes novelty, and how it tries to make daily life feel a little more interesting, even if only for a moment. Saying "bless you" after a sneeze. Saying "bless you" after a sneeze is one of those automatic habits nearly everyone does, even though most people don't stop to question why. You hear someone sneeze and reflexively respond with bless you, God bless you, or Gesundheit, often before you even realize you said it. It feels deeply embedded in social behavior, yet the sneeze itself and the response have nothing logically to do with each other. But this common ritual has psychological, cultural, and social roots that go back thousands of years and still influence how we behave today. The first origin of bless you comes from ancient superstition. Long ago, people believed that sneezing expelled the soul from the body or that evil spirits could enter during the sneeze. Saying bless you was meant to protect the person's spirit or keep harmful forces away. Even though we no longer believe this in a literal sense, the habit stayed embedded in culture. Another explanation came during outbreaks of illness. In the past, sneezing was viewed as a sign of sickness or plague. Saying bless you was a prayer for protection, well-wishing, or hope for recovery. The phrase became a gesture of care, and over generations it turned into a reflex. Even today, when someone sneezes multiple times, people may ask, "Are you okay?" or "Do you need anything?" Because sneezing triggers a protective instinct. Emotionally, saying bless you fulfills a social need. It acknowledges the person, shows empathy, and prevents awkward silence. Sneezing is sudden and attention-grabbing, and responding calmly helps maintain social harmony. Humans are wired to reduce awkwardness and increase social connection, and bless you is a quick, easy way to do that. Psychologically, the response comes from a subtle form of social bonding. When someone sneezes, their body involuntarily makes a loud, spasmodic sound. The response serves as a moment of social interaction. It shows, "I'm aware of you, I care about your well-being, and I notice your presence." Even strangers say it to each other because the brain recognizes sneezing as a moment requiring acknowledgement. There is also a reflexive side to it. Because the phrase has been repeated for so many generations, the brain stores it as a habitual social script. When someone sneezes, the brain doesn't stop to think. It pulls the response automatically, like greeting someone when they say hello. It is no different from saying bless you without thinking about what the phrase actually means. The brain chooses familiarity over silence. Some cultures respond differently, often using words or phrases that mean health. That is because sneezing originally signaled a threat to well-being, and society developed phrases to counter that threat. This shows that the behavior is not random. It is socially meaningful, even if it has been simplified over time. Interestingly, people often feel rude or guilty if they don't say it, even though logically nothing bad will happen. That feeling is rooted in social pressure. Humans are wired to avoid behaviors that create tension or appear inconsiderate. Even when the sneezer doesn't expect a response, the habit is so deeply ingrained that remaining silent feels unnatural. Saying bless you also reveals how humans care about rituals. Rituals bring predictability, comfort, and structure. They make social life smoother. When something sudden happens, like a sneeze, the ritual response fills the gap, preventing uncertainty. Rituals exist because they make human interaction easier, and bless you is one of the tiniest rituals embedded in daily life. So saying bless you after a sneeze may look like a meaningless reflex, but it actually reflects important aspects of human psychology. Empathy, social bonding, tradition, cultural memory, and the desire for harmony. It shows how humans respond to sudden events with care instead of disorder. It shows how our brains preserve rituals from ancient beliefs, even when logic no longer requires them. In the end, saying bless you is a quiet reminder that humans are social creatures. We respond to one another, we acknowledge each other, and we participate in small rituals that make our interactions feel warmer, friendlier, and more connected. Even when all that happened was a sneeze, touching our face constantly without noticing. Touching our face constantly without noticing is one of those habits nearly everyone has. Yet most people don't realize how often they do it. You might rest your hand on your cheek while thinking. Rub your forehead when stressed. Touch your chin when unsure, scratch near your nose, or simply place your fingers near your lips without any awareness. Many people only notice when someone points it out or when they try not to do it, which makes them suddenly aware of how frequent and automatic the behavior is. Although it may seem strange or pointless, touching the face has deep psychological, emotional, and sensory reasons. One of the main explanations is that the face is one of the most sensitive parts of the body. It contains a huge number of nerve endings, especially around the mouth, nose, and eyes. Touching the face provides sensory feedback that helps the brain regulate emotional states. People touch their face during stress, problem-solving, confusion, anxiety, embarrassment, nervousness, or boredom because it gives a small, calming sensation. It acts like a soothing reflex, similar to how children self-soothe by sucking their thumb or rubbing their blanket. Another reason people touch their face constantly is because it helps with thinking. The brain links body movement and cognitive processing. When someone is concentrating deeply, they might rest their face in their hands or press their fingers against their forehead. This physical gesture helps the brain enter a focused state. It becomes almost like a signal of mental loading, allowing the mind to organize thoughts. Face touching is also connected to emotional regulation. When experiencing strong feelings, frustration, embarrassment, disappointment, or anxiety, people automatically touch their face to cope. The act sends soothing signals through the nervous system, helping the body calm down. This is why someone might rub their temples, cover their face, or touch their chin during stressful moments. It's not weakness, it's emotional self-stabilization. This behavior also ties into social awareness. Humans are highly concerned with how others perceive them. When someone feels insecure, awkward, shy, or uncertain in social situations, they tend to touch their face. It's a subconscious barrier, like a quiet shield. The action brings comfort in moments of vulnerability or social sensitivity. There is also a habitual component. People touch their face because they have conditioned themselves to do so repeatedly, like nail biting, hair twirling, or shirt tugging. Once the brain forms a habit loop, the behavior happens without conscious awareness. The brain repeats the gesture because it feels right, even if you're not thinking about it. Daydreaming, zoning out, or mentally drifting increases face touching as well. When the brain isn't fully engaged with the external world, it shifts energy to the internal world, and the body defaults to comforting habits. Touching the face becomes part of this autopilot state. Sometimes face touching is triggered by tiny physical sensations. A hair brushing the cheek, a slight itch, or the temperature of the air can signal a reflex. Most of these signals are processed subconsciously. Even wiping something off the face can evolve into a touch habit over time. Interestingly, touching the face also aids emotional expression. Humans use facial gestures to communicate feelings consciously and unconsciously. Touching the face draws attention to parts of the face and helps the brain emphasize emotional states. Think about someone cupping their face in shock, rubbing their eyes in fatigue, or covering their mouth in surprise. The gesture supports emotional communication. Touching your face is extremely common, and practically everyone does it multiple times a day, often dozens of times without noticing. It is not a sign of nervousness, incompetence, or immaturity. It is simply a reflection of how the brain connects emotion, sensation, and self-regulation. The face becomes a physical outlet for internal processing. This behavior is one of the quiet reminders that humans are deeply embodied creatures. The mind is not separate from the body. It uses small movements to manage stress, support thinking, and maintain balance. Touching the face constantly shows how closely our nervous system, emotional state, and body awareness are connected. Covering our mouths when shocked. Covering our mouths when shocked is one of those instinctive behaviors that most people do without thinking. You may suddenly hear surprising news, witness something astonishing, receive unexpected information, or feel overwhelmed by a burst of emotion, and your hand flies up to your mouth almost automatically. This reaction feels natural and uncontrollable, yet most of us never stop to wonder why we do it. The truth is, this gesture is deeply rooted in psychology, biology, and social communication. One of the main reasons humans cover their mouths when shocked is because the brain is trying to regulate emotional expression. When something surprising or overwhelming happens, the body reacts faster than conscious thought. The hand rises to cover the mouth because the brain is attempting to suppress an involuntary vocal response, a gasp, a scream, or an exclamation. The gesture acts like an emotional barrier, holding back sound while the mind processes what just happened. This behavior also reflects the brain's instinct to control facial expression. The mouth is one of the most expressive parts of the face. It shows shock, fear, awe, embarrassment, disbelief, or sadness. By covering the mouth, the brain momentarily hides emotional exposure, especially when the mind hasn't had time to decide how to respond. The gesture buys time. It is like pressing pause on outward expression until the brain figures out what to do next. Another reason this happens is social awareness. Humans are deeply attuned to how others perceive them. When something shocking happens, we don't want to appear offensive, rude, overly emotional, or chaotic. Covering the mouth creates a physical boundary that signals, "I'm trying to control myself." It softens the reaction and communicates that you are emotionally aware. This instinct is also tied to modesty and vulnerability. Shock creates sudden vulnerability because emotions break through without permission. Covering the mouth offers a moment of psychological protection. It creates a sense of privacy even in public by partially shielding your emotional state. Interestingly, the gesture also originates from child development. Children cover their mouths when they are surprised, scared, or caught doing something. Adults retain this instinct, but it becomes socially refined and more automatic. The gesture is coded into the brain at an early age and remains for life as a natural emotional reaction. There is also a biological explanation. When people are shocked, their breathing pattern changes, and covering the mouth momentarily stabilizes breathing. The brain might unconsciously use the hand to control airflow during rapid emotional shifts. It is an instinctive action with physical consequences. The gesture can also be a subconscious attempt to avoid saying something impulsive. When the brain is overwhelmed, words might slip out that weren't intended. Covering the mouth stops speech, acting like a communication filter. Emotionally intense situations make thinking and speech collide, and the hand protects against blurting out something inappropriate. Culturally, covering the mouth is understood universally. You can travel anywhere in the world and people interpret it the same way, a sign of shock, disbelief, or emotional reaction. That makes this behavior an example of nonverbal communication hardwired into human behavior. It doesn't require words. The gesture expresses meaning instantly. Another fascinating aspect, covering the mouth can also express empathy. When someone hears bad or tragic news, their hand goes up not just because they are shocked, but because they feel emotional pain for someone else. It's a way of saying, "I'm with you emotionally," without speaking. This instinctive gesture also appears during laughter, embarrassment, awkwardness, or guilt. When someone laughs unexpectedly or nervously, they often cover their mouth because the emotions feel uncontrolled. It is a universal behavior that reveals how humans balance inner emotional states with outward social presentation. So covering our mouths when shocked is not something strange or meaningless. It is a protective reflex, a communication tool, an emotional filter, and a social signal all in one. It shows how deeply connected our physical gestures are to our psychological experiences. It reminds us that human emotions are powerful, fast, and sometimes overwhelming, and that our body instinctively steps in to help manage them. Remembering embarrassing moments out of nowhere. Remembering embarrassing moments out of nowhere is one of the most common psychological experiences, and yet it often feels shocking, irrational, and emotionally uncomfortable. You may be lying in bed, walking through a store, doing chores, working, or trying to relax, and suddenly your brain throws a memory at you. Something you said years ago, something awkward you did, a mistake you made, or a moment you wish you could erase. The shock of the memory appears instantly, often bringing a cringing emotional reaction. People wonder, why am I thinking about that now? But this experience has very clear reasons rooted in how the human brain processes emotion. First, the brain stores embarrassing or painful memories differently than normal ones. Emotionally intense memories are preserved more deeply because the brain treats them as learning experiences. Even if the moment wasn't important to anyone else, the embarrassment felt strong, and the brain marks that moment as something to remember. This comes from evolutionary survival logic. Emotional pain once helped people avoid social rejection. The brain assumes that embarrassment holds important information, so it stores it strongly. Another explanation is that the brain likes to organize unresolved emotions. When something embarrassing happens, you don't always get closure. You walked away wishing you had reacted differently, or you didn't fully process the moment. The brain revisits the memory later to attempt resolution, even if the event is long over. This doesn't mean your brain is torturing you. It is trying to integrate the experience into your identity and emotional understanding. Embarrassing memories also surface when the brain is idle, when you're mentally unstimulated, during quiet evenings, monotonous tasks, showers, or bedtime. The brain scans stored information and triggers old memories because there's space for them to rise. The mind isn't trying to upset you. It's simply shifting from external focus to internal processing. Another reason these memories return is because something in your present environment reminds your brain it even subtly of the past moment. It could be a tone of voice, a situation, a person, a smell, a phrase, or even a similar emotional state. The trigger may be unconscious, but the brain links the present to the past and the memory leaps forward. Social sensitivity plays a role too. Humans are highly aware of how they appear to others. Embarrassing memories return because they represent times when we felt socially exposed or emotionally vulnerable. The brain replays them as a way of protecting our identity, not to hurt us, but to help us learn how to handle social situations better. Sometimes embarrassing moments return when you're growing or changing as a person. The brain reflects on earlier versions of yourself to measure growth. You cringe not because you're weak, but because you are emotionally more mature now than you were then. The memory clashes with your current identity, causing discomfort. There's also a neurological reason: the brain's emotional centers, amygdala and prefrontal cortex, sometimes activate memories unexpectedly, particularly when the brain is tired, stressed, or emotionally overloaded. During these times, memories flood forward without being filtered. Embarrassing memories are also tied to self-evaluation. People who care deeply about relationships and empathy tend to reflect on past interactions more. The brain uses these memories to maintain emotional awareness, ensuring better future communication and social behavior. But here's something reassuring. Other people don't remember your embarrassing moment the way you do. they may not remember it at all. The memory feels huge to you because you experienced the emotion directly. The brain gives it weight because it thinks it needs to protect you from repeating it. So remembering embarrassing moments out of nowhere is not a problem or a flaw. It is the brain processing, learning, organizing identity, and replaying emotional experiences because it cares about your social well-being. It means your brain is active, emotionally aware, and capable of growth. In the end, embarrassing memories returning unexpectedly show that humans are complex emotional beings. We store feelings, not just facts. The brain reflects on past moments as part of shaping who we are now. The discomfort you feel simply shows that you care about how you impact others, and that you've grown since that moment. Repeating songs in our head, earworms. Repeating songs in our head, often called earworms, is one of the most curious psychological experiences humans share. You're going about your day, minding your own business, when suddenly a song, sometimes one you don't even like, starts looping in your head. It might be a few words, a melody, a jingle, or even just a rhythm. You aren't consciously thinking about the song, yet the brain grabs it and replays it over and over. The strange part is that you don't choose when it starts, and you don't decide when it stops. But this behavior has very clear explanations that reveal how memory, attention, and emotion work together. One reason earworms happen is that the brain loves patterns. Music has rhythm, repetition, and structure, and the brain finds this satisfying. When a melody is catchy or repetitive, the brain interprets it as a loopable pattern. It repeats because it wants to complete the song or resolve the pattern, even if the full song isn't playing. Another reason is memory reinforcement. When you listen to music, the song travels through the auditory system to the memory centers of the brain, particularly the hippocampus. If the brain finds the melody interesting or emotionally stimulating, it stores pieces of it. Sometimes the brain replays it to strengthen memory, even if you are not actively trying to remember it. Earworms often happen when the brain is on idle, when you are doing something repetitive, boring, or automatic. Walking, cleaning, washing dishes, showering, the mind drifts. Without enough stimulation, the brain uses music memory to fill the gap. It's a mental placeholder that keeps your brain active even when the environment is quiet or understimulating. Another interesting explanation is that earworms help the brain process emotions. Music is tied to emotional networks, and certain songs or melodies tap into feelings of happiness, nostalgia, longing, sadness, or excitement. The brain replays a song because it's retrieving emotions connected to it. Sometimes you don't remember the event tied to the song, but the emotional link is still active. Songs also get stuck when they are unfinished. If you heard part of a song on the radio or you stopped listening before it ended, your brain loops it to try to complete it. Humans dislike unfinished patterns. That's why cliffhangers in movies feel uncomfortable. A song stuck in your head is the same mechanism, just internally. Earworms can also reflect stress. When the brain is overloaded, it uses music as a mental coping strategy. People often get earworms when they are anxious, trying to fall asleep, or dealing with emotional overload. The song becomes a mental distraction that helps manage internal tension. There's another quirky reason: words combined with melodies stick deeply. That's why companies use jingles. The brain remembers them easily. The combination of rhythm, rhyme, and repetition locks into memory. That's also why earworms often involve the chorus of a song rather than the verses. The chorus is designed to be catchy, repetitive, and emotionally engaging. Earworms also show that the brain is active even when you're not thinking deliberately. The unconscious mind is constantly processing memory, emotion, and sensory impressions. The repeating song reveals a glimpse of the mind working behind the scenes. Nearly everyone experiences earworms, and there is nothing unusual or unhealthy about it. It's a sign of strong memory function, emotional responsiveness, and pattern recognition. Musicians, artists, and creative thinkers often get earworms more because their brains naturally lean toward rhythmic and melodic processing. Interestingly, trying not to think about the song makes it worse. When you resist it, your brain focuses on it more, a psychological principle known as the ironic rebound effect. That's why the more you try to force the song out of your head, the louder it seems to repeat. Earworms reveal something important about humans. We are highly musical beings. Even if you don't play an instrument or consider yourself musical, your brain is wired for rhythm, repetition, and emotional memory. The repeating song is not noise. It's a sign that your brain is active, adaptive, and beautifully complex. Singing in the shower like it's a concert. Singing in the shower like it's a concert is one of those quirky and joyful human behaviors that nearly everyone does, even if they would never sing in front of another person. You might belt out your favorite songs, hum melodies, or improvise lyrics with full passion and freedom, all while the bathroom becomes your private stage. The funny part is that people who are shy, quiet, or nervous in public often transform into confident performers when they step into the shower. And while it might feel silly, this behavior has powerful psychological and biological reasons behind it. One of the main reasons people sing in the shower is emotional release. Water is soothing. It relaxes muscles, reduces stress, and quiets the mind. When you are relaxed, your brain naturally becomes more expressive. Singing lets the emotion flow out, connecting your body and mind. It's a way to lighten your mood, discharge tension, and temporarily escape responsibilities. Another big reason is that singing releases dopamine, the brain chemical linked to happiness, reward, and motivation. When you sing a song you love, you get a small burst of dopamine that makes you feel good. This is one reason people continue singing in the shower even when they know no one is listening. The positive emotional feedback makes the brain want to repeat the behavior. The shower also creates acoustics that make your voice sound better. Bathroom tiles reflect sound waves, creating natural reverb. Your voice feels richer, smoother, and more amplified. Even people who think they cannot sing suddenly sound more confident. The brain responds positively to this improvement, encouraging more singing. Another explanation is privacy. In daily life, many people hesitate to express themselves openly because they fear judgment, embarrassment, or social evaluation. But the shower is a private space. There's no audience, no criticism, no pressure. The brain interprets the space as safe. You can sing imperfectly, passionately, dramatically, or emotionally without fear. The shower becomes an emotional sanctuary. The warm water also increases blood circulation and relaxation, making you feel more physically comfortable. A relaxed body encourages expression. You're not holding tension in your shoulders, jaw, or chest, so your voice flows more naturally. Singing feels easier because your nervous system shifts from stress mode to relaxation mode. People also sing in the shower because music activates memory. The brain stores songs deeply linked to memories, experiences, relationships, and emotions. When you sing, you may relive certain feelings: joy, nostalgia, heartbreak, confidence. The shower frees your mind to wander through these emotional memories. There's also a playful psychological dimension. Humans have an inner child, a part of us that loves creativity, imagination, and fun. The shower is one of the rare places where adults allow themselves to be playful without self-consciousness. Singing becomes a way to reconnect with spontaneity and joy, even if just for a few minutes. Singing can even help problem solving. The relaxed mind becomes more creative, and singing can spark new ideas. Have you ever noticed that some of your best thoughts appear while you're in the shower? The brain shifts into a mode where imagination flows naturally, and music enhances that flow. Another interesting aspect is that singing regulates breathing. Most people breathe shallowly throughout the day due to stress. Singing forces longer exhalations, steady inhalations, and rhythmic breathing patterns, which calm the nervous system and reduce anxiety. You might not realize it, but your brain does. This is part of why singing feels emotionally satisfying. Ultimately, singing in the shower is not a strange habit. It's a powerful psychological and biological coping mechanism. It improves mood, reduces stress, boosts confidence, triggers dopamine, and helps emotional processing. It's a moment where instinct, relaxation, creativity, and emotion come together effortlessly. So when someone sings in the shower like it's a concert, they are not being silly. They are helping their mind reset, giving themselves joy, and expressing emotions safely. It's a deeply human behavior, a moment of freedom, connection, and self-expression that turns an ordinary task into a personal performance. Staring at someone until they notice and look back. Staring at someone until they notice and look back is such a curious and surprisingly universal behavior. You're sitting in a room, standing in a line, or observing someone from a distance, and you find yourself staring. You're not necessarily trying to communicate anything. Sometimes you're simply thinking, zoning out, or lost in your thoughts. But when the other person finally looks back and meets your gaze, you suddenly snap into awareness, feeling surprised or embarrassed. It's a moment of awkward connection, and yet it happens to almost everyone. The psychology behind this seemingly strange habit goes deep into attention, social instincts, and the way human brains interpret eye contact. One of the first explanations lies in the nature of focus. When you stare at someone, it might not be intentional at all. You may be mentally drifting, thinking about something entirely unrelated, and your eyes happen to land on someone's face. The brain is processing internal thoughts, not the external world, so you don't realize you're staring. This kind of zoning out behavior is incredibly common. The person you're looking at feels like a distant background until they turn and look back, snapping you into awareness. Another reason people stare is curiosity. Humans are naturally drawn to faces. We are wired to read expressions, analyze moods, and understand others' emotional states. Even if you're not consciously doing this, your brain is scanning facial details for social cues. It helps you interpret whether someone is friendly, distant, vulnerable, confident, or interesting. This scanning is subconscious, and staring happens before you even notice you're doing it. There's also an element of pattern recognition. The brain is constantly searching for familiarity. Someone who looks like someone you know, someone whose expression you find puzzling, or someone who stands out in some way. When something stands out, the brain keeps looking. This doesn't mean you're trying to communicate anything, just that the brain wants to understand. Another psychological layer comes from attention loops. When you stare at someone, part of your brain checks to see if they will notice. Humans have evolved with a social instinct that monitors whether others are aware of them. Eye contact is powerful because it signals connection, awareness, and sometimes dominance. Two people locking eyes is a primitive interaction, even if it lasts only a moment. Staring until someone notices also reveals something about shared awareness. When they look back, both people become aware of each other's existence in that instant. It creates a brief social moment even without words. That moment triggers a burst of self-consciousness, which is why people often look away quickly afterward, laugh awkwardly, or pretend they weren't staring. Humans are also wired to detect gaze. Our brains have specialized circuits that sense when someone is looking at us. That's why you can feel someone staring even if you haven't seen them yet. This ability evolved for survival. Detecting eyes meant detecting predators or enemies. Today, it plays out in small social moments. When you stare at someone long enough, their brain eventually detects your attention and turns toward it. There's also a chance that staring happens because someone fascinates you, not necessarily physically, but emotionally or energetically. Humans pick up on energy signatures of others: posture, facial tension, the way someone carries themselves. The brain is drawn to these subtle cues. You might stare because something about the person makes your subconscious curious. Sometimes people stare because there's something unresolved inside them, an emotion, a thought, or a question. And the brain zones out visually while processing internally. The eyes simply anchor on a target, and that target happens to be another person. When the other person finally looks back, it often creates mutual embarrassment. But the embarrassment isn't because you did something wrong, it's because humans are extremely sensitive to unplanned social interactions. Staring breaks the invisible barrier of personal privacy. The truth is, staring at someone until they notice and look back is not strange or creepy when it happens unintentionally. It is simply the brain navigating attention, perception, and social instinct. It shows how humans constantly scan their environment, how powerful eye contact is, and how social awareness works beneath consciousness. So this habit is not weird at all. It's actually incredibly human. It reveals curiosity, subconscious scanning, emotional perception, and the primitive instinct to connect through the eyes. Liking the smell of gasoline or permanent markers. Liking the smell of gasoline or permanent markers is one of those surprisingly common yet often misunderstood sensory behaviors. Many people feel drawn to certain chemical or industrial scents, even though they would never intentionally inhale them in a harmful way. You open a gasoline container or walk past a gas station and suddenly the scent seems strangely appealing. Or you uncap a permanent marker and breathe in the aroma with a tiny sense of satisfaction. Most people do this secretly because it feels like an odd preference. But there are real biological and psychological explanations behind it. The first reason people enjoy these smells is that many industrial scents trigger the brain's reward pathways. Gasoline and markers contain volatile compounds that stimulate olfactory receptors strongly. Instead of giving off a soft scent like flowers or fruit, they produce a bold, intense pattern that grabs attention. The brain reacts with curiosity and mild pleasure because intense sensory stimulation activates dopamine pathways. It's not that the smell is good in a simple sense. It's that the brain enjoys the sensation of something powerful and distinctive. Another reason has to do with memory. The sense of smell is deeply connected to the emotional memory center of the brain, specifically the limbic system. If you encountered the smell of gasoline or markers during moments of childhood adventure, going on road trips, working in the garage with family, visiting art classrooms, the scent becomes linked to those pleasant memories. The smell feels good because it is tied to emotional warmth, nostalgia, excitement, or creativity. The brain isn't reacting to the chemical itself, it's reacting to the emotional memories hidden behind it. There is also something interesting about novelty. Gasoline and marker scents are not sweet or soft, they are sharp and unusual. Humans are naturally drawn to things that stand out. The brain likes unusual sensory stimulation because it breaks monotony and creates moments of surprise. These unusual scents activate the curiosity circuits in the brain, almost like a sensory puzzle. Another explanation comes from the way these scents activate the trigeminal nerve, which is responsible for detecting sharp or stimulating sensations. This nerve responds to strong odors, spicy foods, cool mint, and even bright carbonation. When gasoline or markers are smelled, the trigeminal nerve sends a stimulating sensation that the brain interprets as interesting or energizing. There is also a psychological aspect involving contrast. We are surrounded by natural smells most of the time: plants, food, air, detergents. When something artificial and strong interrupts these familiar scents, the brain pays attention. The contrast itself becomes stimulating and sometimes strangely enjoyable. Importantly, liking the smell doesn't mean someone wants to sniff chemicals intentionally or dangerously. It simply shows that the brain reacts to certain sensory profiles with interest. Many people love the smell of freshly opened tennis balls, new car interiors, tar on the road, or fresh paint. These are all examples of industrial scents triggering sensory curiosity. There's also something comforting about control. When you smell gasoline or markers, you are in a safe context. You're not being forced into danger. The brain interprets the sensory stimulation as intense but harmless, which makes it enjoyable in small doses. It's also worth noting that not everyone likes these scents, and that's normal. People's sensory systems vary. Some brains are more sensitive to chemical odors and register them as unpleasant or overwhelming. But the fact that so many humans find these smells appealing tells us something fascinating about perception. Our enjoyment of smells isn't based purely on nature. It's shaped by emotion, memory, contrast, and sensory processing. So liking the smell of gasoline or permanent markers is not strange, creepy, or unhealthy when experienced casually. It reflects how complex the brain's sensory processing is, how scent links with memory, reward, curiosity, and emotional experience. It reminds us that human perception isn't simple and that even the most unusual preferences have deep psychological roots. Fidgeting when nervous. Fidgeting when nervous is one of the most universal human behaviors, yet many people never stop to ask why it happens. You might tap your fingers, play with your hair, jiggle your leg, click a pen, shift your feet, bite your nails, twirl an object, or adjust your clothes. These behaviors appear automatically, often without conscious intention. Some people feel annoyed with themselves for fidgeting, while others try to hide it. But the truth is that this behavior has deep psychological, neurological, and emotional roots. Fidgeting isn't random. It is the brain trying to regulate itself. One major reason people fidget when nervous is that the nervous system is overloaded. When you feel anxious or stressed, your body releases adrenaline and other stress hormones. These chemicals activate your muscles, increase heart rate, and prepare you for action. The body thinks something important or potentially threatening is happening, so it shifts into alert mode. Fidgeting becomes a physical outlet for some of this excess energy. The body needs to move to discharge the tension. Fidgeting also helps regulate emotional overwhelm. When feelings are intense, like worry, fear, embarrassment, or anticipation, motion helps stabilize the nervous system. Small repetitive movements act as a calming mechanism. They give the brain something predictable to focus on, which helps ground you when emotions feel chaotic. This physical response is similar to rocking, deep breathing, or squeezing a stress ball. It reduces anxiety physiologically. Another explanation is that fidgeting helps the brain focus. People often fidget when they're concentrating, problem-solving, or planning in their head. The movement increases brain activity and circulation, helping maintain alertness. Children who move while learning are not distracted. They are regulating themselves so they can concentrate better. Adults do the same thing, just in subtler ways. There's also a sensory reason behind fidgeting. Humans have tactile needs. The desire to feel texture, motion, or contact. When we feel emotionally exposed or vulnerable, touching or moving something brings comfort. Playing with hair, rubbing hands together, tapping feet, or holding an object gives sensory reassurance. It is the body saying, Let me feel something steady to balance this emotional uncertainty. Social pressure also triggers fidgeting. When someone feels judged, watched, or evaluated, the brain goes into social defense mode. Fidgeting becomes a coping mechanism to shift discomfort, release nervous energy, or avoid overwhelming eye contact. It's not a flaw, it's a protective response. Memory plays a role too. Fidgeting behaviors often begin in childhood, where movement is used to self-soothe, explore, or release energy. The brain remembers that this helped before, so it continues the behavior in adulthood. It becomes automatic and unconscious. Another layer of explanation is that movement interrupts spiraling thoughts. Anxiety often feeds itself. One worried thought leads to 10 more. Fidgeting breaks the cycle. It interrupts the mental loop. The brain temporarily focuses on the physical sensation, giving relief from overwhelming emotion. Interestingly, fidgeting can also be a sign of emotional intelligence. People who are aware of their internal emotional states, even unconsciously, tend to use movement to manage those states more effectively. Instead of freezing, shutting down, or panicking, the nervous system finds a physical outlet. It's actually a healthier coping response than bottling everything up. Fidgeting is extremely common, not just in anxious people, but in people dealing with normal stress, excitement, anticipation, uncertainty, or high-focus situations. It shows that the brain and body are deeply interconnected, that emotions are not just mental but physical experiences. The fact that fidgeting makes you feel calmer means your nervous system knows what it is doing. So fidgeting when nervous isn't a sign of weakness, immaturity, or instability. It is a natural response tied to self-regulation, sensory needs, emotional balance, and cognitive focus. It reveals how the body instinctively protects itself from overwhelming emotional states. The next time you catch yourself fidgeting, instead of judging it, recognize that your brain is simply helping you manage stress. Feeling secondhand embarrassment for others. Feeling secondhand embarrassment for others is one of the most fascinating and deeply human emotional reactions. You're watching someone do something awkward, cringeworthy, socially unaware, or embarrassing. And even though it's happening to them, your body reacts as if it's happening to you. You might look away, cover your face, laugh nervously, or physically flinch. The discomfort feels real, even though you're not involved in the situation at all. This emotional experience is powerful, and it explains a lot about empathy, social instinct, and the human brain. The first reason we experience secondhand embarrassment is because humans are wired to be social creatures. Our brains evolved to monitor social behavior closely because belonging to the group meant survival. If someone behaved in a way that might cause rejection or loss of status, the brain paid attention. Even today, when someone appears embarrassed, your brain automatically simulates that emotion as if you're in their place. It's a form of social learning. The brain takes notes on what might lead to awkwardness so you can avoid it in your own life. Another big reason is empathy. Humans have neural mechanisms called mirror neurons, which allow us to experience what others feel just by observing them. When you see someone trip, freeze up, forget their words, or do something cringe-inducing, those neurons fire. You feel their embarrassment because your brain mirrors their emotional state. This isn't weakness. It's the biology of social connection. Secondhand embarrassment is especially strong when the person doesn't realize how embarrassing their behavior is. When someone confidently does something socially awkward, your brain senses the mismatch between how they see themselves and how others see them. That disconnect creates emotional tension, and the brain reacts protectively. There's also an identity factor. When we see someone embarrass themselves, we fear being associated with that behavior. The brain thinks, would I do that? Could that happen to me? Secondhand embarrassment becomes a rehearsal mechanism. The brain tries to prevent future social mistakes by simulating the emotion now. Humans also crave smooth social interaction. When a situation becomes awkward, uncomfortable, or socially messy, the brain shifts into emotional alert mode. Secondhand embarrassment arises because the brain wants to fix the awkwardness, even though we have no control over the situation. Interestingly, secondhand embarrassment isn't just negative. It can also connect people. When you cringe for someone, it shows emotional insight. It means you can sense social boundaries, understand emotional cues, and think beyond your own perspective. People with strong empathy often feel secondhand embarrassment more intensely because they are finely attuned to emotional dynamics. Another explanation is that embarrassment is contagious. Just as laughter spreads, awkwardness spreads. Humans synchronize emotional states to maintain group cohesion. If someone in the group felt embarrassed and nobody reacted compassionately, it could create disconnection. So the brain simulates the emotion to maintain harmony. Secondhand embarrassment also appears when watching movies, TV shows, comedians, or social media clips. Even when you know it's fictional, the brain reacts because it processes emotions automatically. It can't always tell the difference between acting and reality. Your brain focuses on the social mistake, not the context. Children and teens often experience secondhand embarrassment strongly because they are learning social rules. As adults, we still feel it, but for slightly different reasons. We've lived through awkward moments ourselves and don't want others to suffer through them. In a way, secondhand embarrassment is a message from the brain that says, I understand what it feels like to be human, vulnerable, and imperfect. It shows compassion, emotional intelligence, and social awareness. So feeling secondhand embarrassment isn't strange or weak. It's one of the clearest proofs that humans are emotionally connected. It shows how deeply we understand each other, how sensitive we are to social experiences, and how the brain works to protect us from emotional harm, even when the embarrassment isn't ours.